Sarah Thompson, a wealthy restaurateur, steps into the chaos of her struggling flagship restaurant, disguised as a cook. What she uncovers shakes her to the core: toxic leadership, crushed spirits, and a trail of corruption threatening to destroy everything she built. Amid the fiery kitchens and simmering tensions, Sarah battles not only deceit and betrayal, but also her own growing vulnerability. And she save her crumbling empire, win back the trust of her team, and find love where she least expects it. But before diving into the twists and turns of this story, let me know where you're tuning in from in the comments below. If you're captivated by tales of redemption and resilience, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on the next gripping story. And guess what? Once you've subscribed, I won't stop. The soft hum of the city filtered into Sarah Thompson's penthouse through floor-to-ceiling windows. The sprawling skyline of New York glittered in the early evening, a sharp contrast to the tension crackling in the air. Sarah stood before her mirror, adjusting the plain white chef's uniform that felt foreign against her skin. Her reflection was a stranger. No designer suit, no diamond-studded accessories, just a simple uniform that marked her as one of the many nameless faces in a kitchen. Her dark brown eyes, usually steely with confidence, now carried a hint of vulnerability. She adjusted her chef's hat once more, forcing her hands to still as doubt clawed at her resolve. Matt slowed the minibuses to a stop. They tell me everything's fine, but the numbers don't lie. Complaints, slipping quality, staff turnover. What's happening to my dream? The dream was Golden Kitchen, the crown jewel of her restaurant empire. It was the first business she had built from the ground up, a testament to years of hard work and ambition. But lately, cracks had begun to show, threatening everything she'd worked for. The click of heels interrupted her thoughts as her assistant Lila stepped into the room. Lila, dressed in a sharp blazer and clutching a clipboard, hesitated at the sight of Sarah in her unusual attire. Lila hesitated. "You don't have to do this. You've got managers for a reason, Sarah. Delegation. It's why people like us hire people like them." Sarah turned, her jaw set with determination. "Managers who tell me what they think I want to hear. That's the problem, Lila. I don't need filtered reports or empty reassurances. I need the truth." Lila sighed, shifting her weight awkwardly. "Lila, this is risky. What if someone recognizes you? The staff, they won't. It's been years since I spent any real time there. Most of the kitchen staff wouldn't know me if I walked in with my name plastered on my forehead." The words were a bitter pill to swallow, but they were true. Sarah had built her empire from scratch, but as her success grew, so did the distance between her and her businesses. Golden Kitchen was once her passion, her pride. Now, it felt like a stranger. Sarah's gaze returned to the mirror. She straightened her posture, ignoring the flutter of unease in her chest. "Sarah, I need to know what's really happening. If I can't save this place, I don't deserve to call it mine." Lila hesitated, then nodded, recognizing the finality in Sarah's tone. "Lila, all right, I've arranged for you to start tonight. But be careful. Kitchens aren't exactly known for their hospitality, and this one's been especially tense. It has icy floors, and everything in a Nis mansion feels like it's too nice to be true." Sarah smiled faintly, though it didn't reach her eyes. Curious, bending down and pulling Boots onto his feet. Sarah said, "I can handle the heat, Lila. I just hope the kitchen can handle me." Sarah grumbled. She took out her key. As the penthouse door clicked shut behind her, Sarah left behind the world of boardrooms and investor meetings. Tonight, she wasn't Sarah Thompson, the celebrated entrepreneur. She was just Sarah, an anonymous chef stepping into the heart of her crumbling dream, ready to uncover the truth. The hum of the city was replaced by the chaotic symphony of Golden Kitchen's heart. The kitchen. The sharp clang of metal on metal, the sizzle of oil meeting hot pans, and the cacophony of voices created an overwhelming introduction. Sarah hesitated at the entrance, her senses assaulted by the tang of citrus, burnt oil, and sweat. This was a world far removed from the polished confines of her penthouse, and yet it was supposed to be hers. Drawing a steadying breath, she stepped inside. The air was thick with heat and tension, a stark contrast to the icy reception she immediately received. Jack, the head chef, towered over a prep table, his gray-streaked hair damp with sweat and his arms corded with years of hard labor. His piercing eyes landed on Sarah, narrowing with suspicion. Growled. What's this? Another wannabe cook? You lose a bet or something? His tone was enough to make a lesser person retreat, but Sarah held her ground. Sarah, steady here to work. Hope you don't mind a fresh set of hands. Jack's lips twisted into something between a smirk and a sneer. Jack, hope you've got thick skin. This ain't no cooking school. You'll either keep up or you'll quit like the rest. Before Sarah could respond, another figure emerged from the shadows of the bustling kitchen. Robert, the manager, cut through the chaos with his sharp suit and an aura of authority that felt as cold as the stainless steel counters. His slicked-back hair and calculated gaze made it clear he was a man accustomed to control. Another new hire, don't waste my time. If you can't keep up, there's the door. The room seemed to quiet briefly, the staff glancing over their shoulders as if waiting for Sarah's reaction. She felt their silent judgment, the skepticism, the sizing up. Sarah overheard the conversation and sighed in relief, as well as confusion. Sarah met Robert's gaze head-on, her voice calm but firm. Sarah, I'll make sure I'm worth your time. Robert's lips twitched, more a scowl than a smile, before he turned away with a dismissive wave of his hand. Robert, we'll see, just don't slow us down. Jack chuckled under his breath, shaking his head as he returned to his task. You've got guts, I'll give you that. But guts don't chop onions or sear steaks. Get to work. Sarah was directed to a corner of the kitchen where a stack of unpeeled potatoes loomed, their skins dusty and unwelcoming. As she picked up a peeler, the weight of the situation pressed down on her. This wasn't just about peeling potatoes. It was about proving herself in a world where every mistake was magnified. The hours stretched as Sarah immersed herself in the rhythm of the kitchen. The staff moved like a chaotic orchestra, each player contributing to the symphony of service. But the dissonance was clear. Orders barked too harshly, mistakes met with reprimands rather than guidance, and an underlying tension that couldn't be ignored. As Sarah peeled, chopped, and sweated through the night, she couldn't help but notice the cracks in the foundation. Jack's gruff leadership veered into hostility at times, and Robert's presence was like a cold shadow, monitoring and criticizing without offering solutions. By the end of her first shift, Sarah's hands were blistered and her back ached. Yet, she felt the faintest flicker of satisfaction. She had survived the chaos, the scrutiny, and the heat. As the kitchen began to wind down, Jack threw a towel over his shoulder and gave her a cursory glance. Jack, you didn't quit. That's more than I can say for some. Don't think that means you've earned anything, though. Sarah nodded, keeping her exhaustion hidden behind a mask of calm. Sarah, I'm not here for handouts. I'm here to work. Jack grunted in response before walking off, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts. The night had been grueling, but it was only the beginning. If this was the lion's den, she was determined to prove she belonged. The kitchen at Golden Kitchen was unforgiving. A crucible where only the strongest, or the most desperate, survived. From the moment Sarah stepped in, she was assigned the grunt work. The potatoes seemed endless, her fingers aching and raw by the time she worked through just one batch. Despite her resolve, she could feel exhaustion creeping in. Jack's sharp bark of orders cut through the noise like a whip, his gruff demeanor a constant reminder that mistakes weren't tolerated. Pick up the pace. Those potatoes won't peel themselves, and we don't have all night. Sarah bit back a retort, focusing instead on keeping her hands moving. She didn't need to draw any more attention to herself. not when Robert's cold, scrutinizing eyes were constantly sweeping the room. His silent presence felt heavier than Jack's booming voice, an unspoken threat that hung in the air. Robert would occasionally lean against the wall, his arms crossed, his gaze drilling into anyone who dared slow down. It wasn't just his demeanor that unsettled her, it was the way the staff seemed to shrink under his watchful eye. The energy in the kitchen shifted whenever he was near, conversations hushed, moving sharper, as if everyone feared being the next target of his cutting remarks. Sarah's fingers slipped on the peeler, a small nick slicing into her skin. She hissed quietly, pressing her thumb against the wound to stop the bleeding. Before she could grab a bandage, a soft voice broke through the noise. "To Emily." Sarah looked up to see a young woman with gentle eyes and a quick, practiced efficiency. Emily handed her a bandage from her apron pocket, her movements careful and quiet, as if not to draw attention. Keep it covered, or Jack will make a scene." Sarah nodded, murmuring her thanks. For a moment, the young sous chef lingered, her voice barely audible over the clatter of the kitchen. "Emily, don't let them get to you. This place eats people alive if you let it." Her words struck a chord with Sarah. Emily's kindness stood out in a place where empathy seemed to have been replaced by survival instincts. "Sarah, thanks, I'll keep that in mind." As Emily slipped back into the chaos, Sarah couldn't help but notice the tension etched into the young woman's face. It was the look of someone who cared deeply about her work but had long since learned to keep her head down. The night wore on, and Sarah began to understand the cracks in Golden Kitchen's foundation. Jack's sharp tongue and quick temper pushed the staff to their limits, but it was Robert's oppressive presence that truly poisoned the atmosphere. Every decision seemed to be dictated by fear. Fear of mistakes, fear of reprimands, fear of being the next to walk out the door. At one point, Sarah overheard a hushed conversation between two line cooks. Line cook 1. "I can't take much more of this. Jack's bad enough, but Robert? He's a vulture." Line cook 2. "Just keep your head down. Nobody lasts here long if they don't." Sarah's stomach tightened. The more she observed, the clearer it became that this wasn't just a tough kitchen. It was a toxic one, where creativity and passion were suffocated by hostility and fear. By the end of her shift, Sarah's hands were blistered and her body ached, but her mind was racing. She wasn't just uncovering flaws in management, she was beginning to see the human cost of it all. As she packed up for the night, she caught Emily's eye. The young sous chef offered her a small, encouraging smile before disappearing into the night. For the first time since stepping into the lion's den, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope. If someone like Emily could survive this environment, maybe there was a chance to save Golden Kitchen after all. The oppressive rhythm of the kitchen was interrupted by a new presence. The staff, bent over their stations, glanced up as the doors swung open and Ethan entered. His arrival was as natural as a breath of fresh air, a stark contrast to the stifling tension that usually filled the room. Tall, with a warm smile and an easy confidence, Ethan moved through the space as if he belonged. His sleeves were rolled up, his demeanor approachable, but there was an undeniable command in his presence. The energy in the kitchen shifted almost immediately. "All right, team, let's remember why we're here. Cooking isn't about fear, it's about passion. Let's make something extraordinary tonight." The words hung in the air like a challenge, and for the first time since Sarah had stepped into the kitchen, she noticed a flicker of something in the staff's eyes. Respect. Hope. Jack, however, seemed less than impressed, grunting as he resumed chopping vegetables. Robert, standing in his usual corner of scrutiny, crossed his arms, his jaw tightening. "We don't need speeches, Ethan. What we need is consistency." Ethan turned to Robert, his smile unwavering, but his tone firm. Decency comes from a team that believes in what they're doing, not one that's scared to make a mistake. The tension between the two men was palpable, but Ethan didn't linger. He moved through the kitchen, checking on stations, offering encouragement and rolling up his sleeves to join the work. When he reached Sarah's station, she was hunched over a cutting board, her movements deliberate but far from perfect. Her hands were still sore from peeling potatoes the night before, and the knife felt awkward in her grip. Ethan leaned against the counter, watching her for a moment before speaking. "Ethan? Not bad, but you're gripping the knife too tightly. It's all in the wrist." Sarah looked up, startled by his presence. "Sarah, I'm still getting the hang of it." Ethan smiled, picking up a knife from the counter. "Ethan, here, let me show you." Standing beside her, he demonstrated a smooth, fluid motion, his hands moving with practiced ease. His voice was calm and encouraging, a stark contrast to the barked orders she was used to. "Ethan, relax your grip, let the blade do the work." Sarah mimicked his movements, and though it wasn't perfect, it was better. "See, you've got potential, just need a little refinement." As he stepped back, Sarah couldn't help but feel a twinge of guilt. Ethan's authenticity and kindness were disarming, making it harder to focus on her mission. She was here to uncover the truth, not to be charmed by the sous chef. The rest of the night passed in a blur, but Sarah couldn't ignore the shift in the kitchen's atmosphere. Ethan's presence seemed to bring out the best in the staff. Emily, usually quiet and reserved, smiled as she plated a dish under his guidance. Even Jack, gruff as ever, toned down his barking as the evening wore on. But Robert's cold, watchful gaze remained. He didn't interfere directly, but his disapproval was evident. Sarah noticed the way his eyes followed Ethan, calculating and wary. By the end of the shift, Sarah found herself conflicted. Ethan was unlike anyone else in the kitchen. His charisma, his warmth, his ability to inspire the team all stood in stark contrast to the toxic dynamics she'd witnessed so far. As the staff cleaned up, Ethan passed by her station again, pausing briefly. "Ethan, good work tonight. Stick with it. You've got the spark." Sarah managed a small smile, her thoughts racing. Ethan was right. She did have the spark. But whether it was for cooking or for something much larger, she couldn't yet say. For now, she had a role to play and a mystery to unravel, and Ethan, with his disarming charm and genuine passion, was quickly becoming a complication she hadn't anticipated. It was late, the hum of the kitchen reduced to the faint clatter of dishes being cleaned. Most of the staff had already left, their exhaustion trailing them like shadows. Sarah lingered, wiping down her station slowly, her mind spinning with everything she had observed over the past few days. The tension, the fear, the cracks in the system, it was all pointing to something deeper. Something wrong. As she turned to leave, the sound of raised voices stopped her in her tracks. She followed the noise to a small hallway near Robert's office, keeping to the shadows. "Do your job, Jack, or I'll find someone who will. I'm not paying you to waste time on your so-called passion projects." Jack's voice, usually gruff and commanding, was tinged with sarcasm and barely contained anger. And Jack right, because burned-out cooks and microwaved sauces are the hallmark of fine dining. "This isn't what we signed up for, Robert." Sarah's breath hitched as she leaned closer, her heart pounding. The argument was fierce, and it wasn't hard to see the cracks in their professional relationship. "This isn't about what you signed up for, it's about profits. The bottom line is what matters, not your creative whims. If you can't handle that, I'll find someone who can. You're running this place into the ground. People are quitting because of you, not me. And when there's no one left to cook, what's your precious bottom line worth then?" The venom in Jack's words hung in the air. Sarah stayed frozen, the pieces of the puzzle clicking together in her mind. She had seen the signs: corners being cut, quality slipping, complaints being brushed under the rug. Robert wasn't just fostering a toxic environment, he was actively driving the restaurant to its knees. The argument abruptly ended with the sound of a door slamming. Sarah ducked into a nearby alcove as Robert stormed past, his face set in a grim scowl. Jack emerged a moment later, muttering curses under his breath as he headed back toward the kitchen. Once the hallway was clear, Sarah hesitated for only a moment before her curiosity pushed her forward. She glanced at Robert's office door, ajar and inviting, as if daring her to take the next step. Inside, the office was stark and meticulously organized, every file and ledger placed with precision. It was a sharp contrast to the chaos of the kitchen. Sarah's eyes scanned the room, landing on a black leather-bound ledger on the desk. Her pulse quickened as she flipped it open, the numbers inside catching her eye immediately. Invoices, receipts, and expenses. Her stomach churned. This wasn't just mismanagement, it was theft. Robert was skimming profits, draining her business from the inside while blaming the staff for every shortfall. Before she could process the full weight of the discovery, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. Panic surged through her as she quickly closed the ledger and slipped it back into place. She glanced around the room, ensuring everything looked untouched, then slipped out the door and into the shadows. Robert's silhouette appeared moments later, his movements tense as he entered the office. Sarah's heart pounded as she crept away, her thoughts racing. Back in the empty kitchen, she leaned against a counter, her hands trembling. The ledger was damning evidence, but confronting Robert head-on wasn't an option. Not yet. She needed more proof, and she needed to understand the full extent of his scheme. As the last of the kitchen lights flickered off, Sarah knew she was on borrowed time. Robert was ruthless, and if he suspected her of snooping, he wouldn't hesitate to retaliate. But she couldn't ignore what she'd found. The truth was clear. Saving Golden Kitchen wasn't just about improving its food or fixing its culture. It was about rooting out the corruption threatening to destroy it. And for that, Sarah would have to tread carefully, balancing her investigation with her role in the kitchen, all while hiding her true identity. As she stepped out into the night, the cold air hit her like a wake-up call. There was no turning back now. The fight for her dream had become a battle against its greatest enemy. From within. The mood in the kitchen began to shift in subtle but significant ways. Ethan's approach to leadership was infectious, his warmth and genuine enthusiasm creating an atmosphere of collaboration instead of fear. He wasn't just teaching techniques, he was fostering a sense of pride in the work. "Let's try something different tonight," Ethan announced during the pre-service prep. His voice was calm but carried an energy that drew the staff's attention. "We're going to work on plating. It's not just about taste, it's about presentation. Every plate that leaves this kitchen should be art." The staff exchanged wary glances, unused to this kind of encouragement. Sarah, stationed near Emily, noticed how the young sous chef straightened, her shoulders less tense. Her face lightened, as if the weight of impossible tasks had been lifted from her shoulders. Ethan moved through the kitchen, demonstrating techniques with effortless precision. He showed Emily how to swirl a reduction sauce into a delicate spiral, coached the pastry chef on perfecting quenelles, and even took a moment to adjust Jack's garnishing method. Jack grunted in response, but Sarah noticed the faintest flicker of approval in his eyes. Even the grizzled head chef couldn't deny Ethan's skill. When Ethan reached Sarah's station, she was working on slicing vegetables. Her knife skills had improved under his earlier guidance, but she still lacked the finesse of the more seasoned cooks. Ethan stopped beside her, watching for a moment before speaking. "Ethan, you're getting better, but you're still holding back. Here, let me show you." He took the knife from her hands, demonstrating the fluid, precise motions she had struggled to master. The closeness of his presence made her heartbeat quicken, a reaction she tried to ignore. "Ethan, it's all about confidence. Trust your hands, trust the blade." Sarah picked up the knife again, mimicking his movements. This time the slices were cleaner, more even. "Ah, Ethan," smiling smiles, "told you, you've got the spark." Sarah hesitated, his words sinking in. He wasn't just talking about her knife skills. "Isn't just a job for you, is it?" The question caught her off guard. She paused, her hand hovering over the cutting board as she considered how to answer. Sarah, hesitant. For a moment, Ethan studied her, his warm brown eyes searching hers. She felt exposed, as if he could see through the layers of deception she had built around herself. Ethan, good. That's what makes great chefs. Passion. You've got it. You just need to let it out. His words stayed with her as the night wore on. Watching him work, Sarah couldn't deny the effect he had on the team. Under his guidance, Emily's confidence blossomed. Jack's sharp edges softened, and even the line cook seemed more willing to take creative risks. But for Sarah, Ethan's impact was more complicated. His kindness and authenticity chipped away at the walls she had built, making it harder to keep her mission at the forefront. She was here to uncover the truth about Golden Kitchen's decline, not to lose herself in the warmth of his smile or the encouragement of his words. By the end of the night, the team had plated dishes that could rival the best in the city. The staff lingered longer than usual, their conversations light and filled with laughter. For once, the kitchen didn't feel like a battlefield. As Sarah wiped down her station, Ethan approached her again, a plate in hand. "Ethan, taste this. It's a new idea I've been working on." She took the fork he offered. Her curiosity piqued. The flavors were bold and perfectly balanced, a testament to his creativity. "Sarah, it's incredible." Ethan grinned, leaning against the counter. "Ethan, it's the kind of thing we could do more of if this place let people breathe a little." His casual remark carried an undertone of frustration, and Sarah realized he wasn't blind to the toxic undercurrents that still lingered. As their conversation trailed off, Sarah felt a pang of guilt. Ethan believed in her potential, in the team's ability to create something extraordinary. But he didn't know the truth, that she was here, not as one of them, but as the owner, investigating the cracks in her own empire. She pushed the thought aside. For now, she let herself enjoy the moment, even if she knew it couldn't last. The restaurant was eerily quiet after hours, the clatter of pots and pans replaced by the faint hum of fluorescent lights. Sarah moved carefully through the empty kitchen, her footsteps muffled by the rubber mats beneath her shoes. Her heart raced, but she forced herself to stay calm. She had to know the full extent of Robert's actions. Too much was at stake to stop now. So she found a comfortable position, trusting a sense of calm that had been driven away by the past few weeks. The hallway leading to Robert's office was dimly lit, the shadows stretching long and foreboding. Sarah paused at the door, which was slightly ajar. She pushed it open carefully, her pulse quickening as she stepped inside. The office was cold and sterile, every item meticulously placed, as though Robert had nothing to hide. But Sarah knew better. She moved quickly, her hands trembling as she rifled through the drawers of his desk. Most of the papers were innocuous, staff schedules, inventory lists. But deeper in the stack, she found something that made her pause. A ledger, similar to the one she had seen before, but this time with even more damning details. She flipped through its pages, her sharp eyes catching inconsistencies immediately. Invoices from suppliers were marked up far beyond reasonable amounts, and a series of cryptic entries hinted at kickbacks from shady dealings. Some pages bore Robert's distinct signature, tying him directly to the financial discrepancies. Sarah's stomach churned as she realized the depth of his corruption. He wasn't just skimming profits. He was bleeding the restaurant dry while masking it with false reports. The complaints from staff, the slipping quality, the constant pressure, it all led back to him. She snapped photos of the most incriminating pages with her phone, her hands shaking slightly as she did. The evidence was damning, but it wasn't enough. She needed more, a complete picture of his operation. As she reached for another file, the sound of footsteps in the hallway froze her in place. Panic surged through her as she hastily closed the ledger and slid it back into the drawer. The door creaked open, and Robert stepped inside, his sharp gaze landing on her immediately. "Snooping where you don't belong, are we?" Sarah's breath caught, but she forced herself to meet his eyes. Sarah, thinking quickly. "I wanted to understand why things are so bad, why we're struggling. I thought I could help." Robert's eyes narrowed, his calculating expression sending a chill down her spine. "Robert, help by going through my desk in the middle of the night? Who are you, really?" The weight of his suspicion hung in the air. Sarah's mind raced, trying to think of a way to diffuse the situation without giving herself away. But she had to. "Sarah, I'm just someone who cares about this place. I've worked in restaurants before, places that fell apart because no one paid attention. I didn't want to see that happen here." Her voice wavered slightly, but she hoped it sounded sincere enough. Robert studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he stepped back, his lips curling into a thin, mocking smile. "Robert, well, I suppose curiosity isn't a crime, but I'd be careful if I were you. This isn't your fight, and sticking your nose where it doesn't belong could get you burned," Drake informed him. Sarah nodded quickly, slipping past him before he could change his mind. Her hands were clammy, her heart pounding as she made her way back to the kitchen. She didn't stop moving until she was outside, the cool night air hitting her like a wave of relief. She leaned against the wall, trying to steady her breathing. Robert's words replayed in her mind, his warning as much a threat as a dismissal. He was on to her, and she had no doubt he would be watching her every move from now on. But she couldn't stop. The evidence she had found was just the beginning, and exposing Robert's corruption was the only way to save Golden Kitchen. For now, she would have to play her role carefully, pretending to be nothing more than a kitchen worker while she pieced together the final pieces of the puzzle. But deep down, Sarah knew the clock was ticking, and Robert wasn't the kind of man to let things slide. The stakes had never been higher, and the game was just beginning. The kitchen buzzed with an excitement Sarah hadn't felt in weeks. Ethan's idea to host a tasting session for Sarah and Emily's new dishes had brought a renewed energy to the team. Plates were being prepped with care, garnished with flair, and sent out to a select group of patrons seated in the private dining room. Emily stood beside Sarah, her face alight with nervous pride as the guests sampled their creations. They're smiling. That's a good sign, right?" Sarah nodded, her own heart swelling with pride. For a brief moment, the pressures of her secret and Robert's corruption faded into the background. Ethan moved through the room, his enthusiasm infectious as he spoke to the guests and encouraged the staff. "Ethan, this is what it's all about, passion on a plate. You're doing great, all of you." When the last course was served, the team gathered in the kitchen, exchanging relieved smiles. The atmosphere felt lighter, as though the weight of the restaurant's struggles had momentarily lifted. Ethan clapped his hands to get everyone's attention. "Ethan, before we clean up, I just want to say how proud I am of this team. Tonight wasn't just about the food. It was about proving what we can do when we work together. Sarah, Emily, your dishes were the stars of the show. Let's hear it for them." Applause filled the room, and Sarah couldn't help but smile, her cheeks warm with both pride and embarrassment. But the celebration was short-lived. The sound of sharp, deliberate footsteps cut through the air as Robert entered the kitchen. His expression was cold, his presence immediately silencing the laughter. "Anything?" "Robbery. Well, isn't this a cozy little moment? Too bad it's built on lies." The room tensed, the staff exchanging uneasy glances. Ethan stepped forward, his tone calm but firm. "Ethan, Robert, we're in the middle of something. If you've got an issue, it can wait." Robert's gaze locked onto Sarah, his smirk icy. "Robert, oh, I think it can't. Your golden girl here? She's not who she says she is." Ethan's expression shifted, confusion clouding his features. "Ethan, what are you talking about?" Robert folded his arms, his tone dripping with disdain. Robert, why didn't you tell him, Sarah, or should I? The weight of every secret she had been keeping crashed down on Sarah in that moment. The expectant stares of the staff, the sharp intensity of Robert's gaze, and the confusion on Ethan's face. It was too much. Her resolve crumbled. With torn eyes, she turned to the stranger whose name tag she still wore. Sarah, breaking under pressure, I own this restaurant. The room fell silent. The clatter of dishes and the hum of the kitchen's machines seemed deafening in the absence of voices. Ethan took a step back, the betrayal evident on his face. You lied to me, to everyone. Sarah felt the sting of his words like a blow, her voice faltering as she tried to explain. Sarah, pleading, impressive eyes. Sarah's pleading body tells her their words are too loud. Say, I found this place. I had to see the truth for myself. The complaints, the turnover. I couldn't trust the reports I was getting. I didn't mean to hurt you or anyone else. Ethan shook his head, his anger laced with disbelief. Ethan, so you thought deceiving us was the best way to handle it? You pretended to be one of us. Let us trust you. Sarah, I didn't mean for it to go this far, but I had to know what was really happening here. Ethan's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing. Ethan, congratulations. Now you know, but at what cost? The tension in the room was suffocating. The staff looked between Sarah and Ethan, their expressions ranging from shock to confusion to anger. Robert, clearly reveling in the chaos, stepped forward with a smirk. Robert, well, there you have it, folks. Your champion of the people isn't exactly what she seems. Makes you wonder what else she's hiding. Sarah turned to face him, a spark of defiance reigniting in her chest. Sarah, I'm hiding nothing compared to you, Robert. You think I don't know what you've been doing? The forged invoices? The kickbacks? You're the reason this restaurant is struggling. The room collectively inhaled, the revelation hanging in the air like a storm cloud. For a moment, Robert's smug expression faltered, but he quickly recovered. Robert, bold accusation. Got any proof to back it up? Sarah didn't answer, but her silence spoke volumes. Ethan looked between them, his frustration palpable. Enough. I need some air. He stormed out of the kitchen, leaving Sarah standing in the center of the room, her chest tightening with regret. She had hoped to save Golden Kitchen, but in exposing her truth, she had risked losing the very people she needed most. The celebration was over, replaced by a chilling uncertainty that hung over them all. The kitchen felt emptier in the days following Sarah's revelation, not because of fewer people, but because of the chasm that now existed between her and the team. Ethan had distanced himself, keeping interactions strictly professional, his once warm demeanor replaced with a cold indifference. Sarah tried to focus on her work, but the weight of his absence gnawed at her. The camaraderie they had built, the trust she had begun to earn, it all seemed to have vanished overnight. The staff, too, looked at her differently now. Conversations stopped when she entered the room, and the side glances she received were heavy with doubt and resentment. Amen. Sarah tried to focus on her work, but the weight of everything else she had put herself through gave her a pang. It could have been worse, Amy thought. Robert, ever the opportunist, wasted no time in stoking the fire. He prowled the kitchen like a predator, his voice dripping with disdain whenever he spoke about Sarah. See, she was never one of us. She used us, lied to us, all to play detective in her own business. Is that the kind of person you want to follow? His words spread like poison, feeding the team's frustrations and dividing the kitchen further. Sarah could see the shift in their demeanor, the way they rallied around Robert's narrative. Robert pulled a bill from his pocket and said, desperate to rebuild trust, Sarah decided to hold an all-staff meeting. It was her last chance to address the growing divide and set the record straight. As the team gathered in the dining room after hours, their expressions were a mixture of skepticism and outright hostility. Standing at the front of the room, Sarah took a deep breath, the weight of her mistakes pressing down on her. But she refused to let it crush her. "Sarah, I know I've let you down. I lied about who I was, and I understand if that's something you can't forgive, but I need you to hear me out." The room was silent, the staff watching her intently. Even Ethan, who had reluctantly attended, leaned against the back wall, his arms crossed. "Sarah, this restaurant isn't just a business to me. It's my life. Golden Kitchen was my first venture, my first success, and I poured everything I had into it. But somewhere along the way, I lost sight of what made it special. I let reports and numbers take the place of real connection, and I failed to see what was happening here until it was nearly too late." She paused, her voice thick with emotion. "Sarah, I came into this kitchen because I needed to understand, not just from a distance but from your perspective. And what I saw was hard to face: tension, fear, a lack of support. That's not the kind of environment I ever wanted for this place." Her gaze swept the room, her eyes meeting those of the staff one by one. "Sarah, I made mistakes and I own them, but I'm not giving up on this restaurant or on any of you. I want to make things right, not as your boss, but as someone who believes in what this team is capable of." "Eve." There was a murmur among the staff, uncertainty flickering in their expressions. Emily, sitting near the front, looked torn, while Jack rubbed the back of his neck, his brow furrowed in thought. Robert, seated at the back, scoffed audibly, cutting through the tension. "Robert, nice speech, but words are cheap. How do we know you mean any of it?" Sarah turned to face him, her voice steady despite the tension. "Sarah, you don't, not yet, but actions speak louder than words, and I'm ready to prove myself. To all of you, Sarah, Seth Gray, and Nicholas Rayland, I'm proud to be the father of your children. Proud to be the father of so many, hoping that through this protective bubble of our children, you can see one of my better selves. Goodbye, old friends. God bless you." For a moment, the room was silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Then, to Sarah's surprise, Jack stood up, his gruff voice breaking the tension. "Jack, she's got guts, I'll give her that, and she's right. This place wasn't broken overnight. Maybe it's worth giving her a chance to fix it." A ripple of agreement passed through the room, hesitant but growing. Emily nodded slowly, and a few others murmured their support. Even Ethan, though still guarded, seemed to soften just slightly. Sarah felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in days. She knew the road ahead would be tough, but the first step had been taken. It was now up to her to rebuild the trust she had broken and prove to her team and herself that Golden Kitchen was worth fighting for. The atmosphere in Golden Kitchen remained tense in the days following Sarah's emotional plea, but a subtle shift was beginning to take place. Conversations were less strained, and though the staff still regarded her with caution, their outright hostility seemed to wane. It was a fragile truce, one Sarah was determined to nurture. Jack, however, remained an enigma. His gruff demeanor hadn't changed, and his sharp commands still echoed through the kitchen. Yet, Sarah caught him watching her during shifts, his usual skepticism replaced by something closer to curiosity. One late evening, long after most of the staff had left, Jack stayed behind to finish inventory. Sarah, working quietly in the corner, was startled when she overheard raised voices from Robert's office. She froze, straining to catch the heated exchange. "Robert, this is how it works, Jack. You stick to the line and I handle the business. Profits first. If you can't stomach that, you're free to leave." Jack's response was sharp and laced with anger. "Jack? Profits? You mean skimming off the top and running this place into the ground? Don't think I don't know what you're doing, Robert." The argument escalated, with Jack's accusations growing louder. Sarah didn't need to hear more. Jack had seen through Robert's schemes, and now she wasn't the only one who knew the truth. The next morning, Jack's demeanor towards Sarah had changed. Though he didn't say much, he was less critical, even offering a gruff nod when she plated a dish particularly well. That afternoon, as the staff gathered for a pre-shift meeting, Jack spoke up, his voice cutting through the chatter. "Listen up. Sarah's made mistakes, no doubt about it. But she's not the enemy. That snake Robert is." The room fell silent, every eye turning to Jack in shock. He rarely spoke in meetings, let alone to defend anyone. "Jack, I've seen what's going on, and it's worse than any of you know. Sarah's trying to fix this place, but she can't do it alone. So maybe it's time we stopped wasting energy being angry at her and started focusing on the real problem." Emily nodded hesitantly, followed by murmurs of agreement from other staff members. The shift in support was palpable, and Sarah felt a surge of gratitude toward Jack. Later that evening, Jack pulled Sarah aside. "Jack, don't think this means I'm your biggest fan, but I overheard Robert last night. He's been lining his pockets while the rest of us bust our asses. If you've got a plan to take him down, I'm in." Sarah nodded, her resolve solidifying. "Sarah, I do, but I need the team behind me." "Jack, you'll have them, I'll make sure of it." With Jack's backing, Sarah felt emboldened to act. She gathered the evidence she had collected, photos of forged invoices, falsified financial records, and testimonies from staff who had witnessed Robert's manipulation. Together with Jack and Emily, they presented their findings to corporate. The meeting was tense, with Robert attempting to deflect every accusation. "This is ridiculous. These so-called documents could have been fabricated by anyone." But Sarah remained composed, presenting her case with undeniable clarity. "Sarah, the evidence speaks for itself. You've been exploiting this restaurant and its staff for your own gain. This isn't just mismanagement, it's theft." Corporate executives exchanged uneasy glances before one finally spoke. "Executive, we'll investigate these claims thoroughly. For now, Robert, you're suspended, effective immediately." Robert's face twisted in fury, but he had no choice but to leave. As he stormed out, Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The battle wasn't over, but the biggest obstacle had been removed. Back at the restaurant, the staff was buzzing with the news of Robert's suspension. Jack's steady presence helped rally the team, and for the first time, there was a sense of unity in the kitchen. Ethan, who had remained distant, began to take notice of Sarah's determination. One evening, after the rush had ended, he approached her as she wiped down her station. "You almost got scratched. Ethan, you really went all in, didn't you?" Sarah looked up, her expression guarded but hopeful. "Sarah, I had to. This place means too much to me to let it fall apart." Ethan nodded, his tone softer than it had been in days. "Ethan, I can see that now. And maybe I was too hard on you. You've got a hell of a fight in you, Sarah." Her heart lifted at his words, though she knew there was still work to be done. "Sarah, thank you, Ethan. That means a lot." As he walked away, Sarah felt a flicker of hope. The tide was turning, and with the team beginning to come together, she knew Golden Kitchen might just have a chance. The buzz in the kitchen had finally started to settle into something productive. With Robert gone and the team rallying around Sarah's vision, a cautious optimism had begun to take hold. But the relative calm was shattered one evening when a sharp knock echoed through the kitchen doors. The maitre d' appeared, his expression pale as he addressed the team. "Maitre d's, Michelin inspectors, they're here, tonight." The words hit like a thunderclap. Conversation stopped, utensils clattered to the counters, and the air grew thick with tension. Sarah froze, her mind racing. This wasn't just another dinner service, this was the future of Golden Kitchen. A Michelin star could validate everything they'd worked for, or its absence could be the final nail in the coffin. Ethan stepped forward, his calm demeanor cutting through the panic. "Ethan, all right, listen up. This is it. Tonight, we cook like our lives depend on it." His voice carried authority, and the staff began to move instinctively, the chaos of their initial reaction transforming into focused preparation. Sarah found herself rooted in place, her hands trembling slightly as the weight of the evening settled on her shoulders. Ethan noticed and stepped closer, his voice lowering to a gentle tone. "Eth." Sarah looked at him, her fear evident. "Sarah, I'm scared, Ethan. What if we fail? What if we fail?" Ethan smiled, the warmth of his expression melting away some of her anxiety. "Ethan, then we fail together. But we won't. I promise." His confidence was infectious, and Sarah nodded, drawing a deep breath to steady herself. As the team sprang into action, the kitchen transformed into a finely tuned orchestra. Ethan directed the flow, his voice firm but encouraging as he moved between stations. "Here. Emily, keep those sauces silky. Jack, I need that steak seared to perfection, just enough crust. Sarah, your risotto is the centerpiece. Make it sing." Sarah threw herself into the work, her hands steady now as she prepared the dish that could define the night. The risotto was a tribute to Golden Kitchen's past and future, a balance of bold flavors and delicate textures that symbolized her journey and the restaurant's revival. The pressure was immense, but the team worked in harmony. Jack's experience, Emily's creativity, and Ethan's leadership melded together, with Sarah pushing herself to match their rhythm. The inspectors sat quietly in the dining room, their presence a constant weight on everyone's minds. Plate after plate left the kitchen, each one a testament to the talent and dedication of the team. Hapless chuckled. It was a clever diversion. "Ethan, stay sharp, everyone. The night's not over yet." The second major said. Time seemed to blur as they worked, the usual markers of service, order tickets, the ebb and flow of diners, replaced by a single, relentless goal: perfection. Finally, the last plate was sent out. The team stood in the kitchen, catching their breath, the tension still palpable as they waited for the inspector's departure. When the maitre d' returned, his face unreadable, the room held its collective breath. Maitre Dave laughed. No immediate feedback, but they seemed impressed. A ripple of cautious relief moved through the staff. Ethan clapped his hands together. "Ethan, no matter what happens, we gave it everything. Be proud of that." "Ethan." He looked at Sarah, his expression softening. "Ethan, and you? That risotto, it sang." Sarah smiled, exhaustion and pride mingling in her expression. "Sarah, I couldn't have done it without all of you." The team lingered in the kitchen that night, the usual rush of cleanup replaced by quiet camaraderie. Whatever the inspectors decided, they had proven to themselves that Golden Kitchen was capable of greatness. As Sarah and Ethan stood by the pass, watching the team laugh and share stories, Sarah felt a spark of hope reignite. The Michelin inspection wasn't just a test of the restaurant. It was a test of their resilience, their unity, and their belief in what they could achieve together. For the first time in weeks, she felt certain they had passed. The news came on an unassuming morning, delivered by a breathless maitre d' who rushed into the kitchen holding a letter. Sarah was at her station, reviewing the menu, when the announcement froze the bustling staff in their tracks. "Maitre d', hey, we did it. We got the star." For a moment, the room was silent, as if no one dared believe it. Then the eruption came. Cheers, shouts, and laughter filled the kitchen as the team embraced one another. Sarah's hands trembled as she held the letter, the confirmation of their Michelin star like a dream she hadn't dared to hope for. The celebration that evening was unlike any other. The dining room, usually reserved for guests, was filled with the entire team, each person glowing with pride. Plates of food from their finest dishes were shared among them, and laughter echoed through the space. Sarah moved through the room, her heart full as she watched the people who had come together to save Golden Kitchen. Jack was uncharacteristically relaxed, laughing with Emily, whose face was alight with joy. For the first time in months, Sarah felt the weight of uncertainty lift. Ethan found her standing by the large windows, gazing out at the city lights. Attention everyone, we are here with Ethan Hayworth, the founder and chief operating officer of Ethan Hayworth Productions International. Sarah turned, her breath catching at the warmth in his expression. They hadn't had a real conversation since the Michelin inspection, but now something unspoken seemed to pass between them. Sarah, I couldn't have done this without you, without any of you. Ethan stepped closer, his tone soft but earnest. Ethan, you could have, but you didn't have to. That's what makes you different, Sarah. You're not just a leader. You're part of this team. You showed us what it means to fight for something worth saving. She smiled, her eyes misting, her tone captured. Sarah, it wasn't just the restaurant, it was all of you. You brought this place back to life, Ethan. He hesitated, then took her hands in his voice low and steady. Ethan, I've been a fool. I let my pride get in the way, let my anger blind me to what really matters. But I'm done running, Sarah. I love you. Flaws, lies, and all. Tears slipped down Sarah's cheeks as she laughed softly, squeezing his hands. Sarah, I love you too. No more lies, I promise. The room seemed to fade away as he leaned in. Their kiss, a moment of clarity amid the chaos of the last few weeks. When they pulled apart, the noise of the celebration returned, but the world felt different. Later that night, Ethan led Sarah outside to the small garden behind the restaurant. The stars above were bright, the city's usual haze giving way to a rare, clear sky. Except, Ethan smiled smartly. Sarah tilted her head, curious, as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Ethan. Tears streamed down her face as she nodded, her voice barely a whisper. Sarah, yes, 1,000 times yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and they laughed as she pulled him into a tight embrace. The garden was quiet, save for the soft rustle of the breeze. But in that moment, it felt like the center of the universe. The night marked the start of a new chapter, not just for Sarah and Ethan, but for Golden Kitchen. The restaurant's transformation was complete, and with a Michelin star as proof of their hard work, it now stood as a beacon of excellence and resilience. Together, Sarah and Ethan looked toward the future, ready to face whatever challenges came next, hand in hand. Months passed, and Golden Kitchen stood transformed. The Michelin star had not only elevated the restaurant's reputation, but also solidified the team's belief in themselves. What had once been a fractured, tense kitchen now thrived as a harmonious symphony of creativity and passion. Customers flocked to taste the magic, and the staff carried themselves with newfound pride. Sarah walked through the bustling dining room, her heart swelling at the sight of full tables and satisfied smiles. The hum of conversation blended with the faint clatter of the kitchen, where Ethan's voice rang out with encouragement. The restaurant was alive in a way she had only dreamed of when she first started her journey. She paused at the counter to watch Emily skillfully plate a dish. The young sous chef, once hesitant and reserved, now moved with confidence, her passion evident in every swirl of sauce and placement of garnish. Emily, great misery, great comfort, no doubt. Later, he wrote. Sarah chuckled, nodding. Sarah, perfect. You've come a long way, Emily. The words carried weight, a testament not only to Emily's growth but to the transformation of everyone in the kitchen, including Sarah herself. Later that evening, as the last guests departed and the staff began cleaning up, Sarah found Ethan leaning against the counter, a relaxed smile on his face. Once Sarah was gone, Ethan, another great night. Sarah joined him, resting her head on his shoulder. Sarah, it feels like a dream sometimes. Seeing this place come back to life, it's everything I hoped for. Ethan turned to her, his smile widening. Ethan, you made it happen. We all did, but it started with you. She hesitated, biting her lip as if holding back a secret. Sarah, actually, There's something else starting soon. Ethan raised an eyebrow, curiosity lighting up his face. He could all hear. Ethan, oh, what's that? Sarah took his hand, placing it gently over her stomach. Sarah, we're adding a new member to the team. Our little sous chef is already stirring things up. And morally, I can't help but smile when I see the pictures of the horses sending each other messages all day long. That's more pure kindness and defiance than Jesus could ever have. Ethan stared at her in stunned silence before breaking into laughter, pulling her into his arms. Our little sous chef? I love it. And I love you. And sorry, The joy between them was palpable, and as they stood there, holding each other in the quiet kitchen, the world seemed to fall into perfect balance. In the weeks that followed, the news of Sarah's pregnancy brought even more warmth to the team. Emily joked about creating a baby menu, and Jack, in his usual gruff way, suggested that the baby might be the only one who could out-cook him someday. As Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point, she realized how much she had learned, not just about running a restaurant, but about herself. One evening, she and Ethan stood outside the restaurant, gazing at the neon sign that proudly bore its name. The starry sky above mirrored the brightness in their hearts. Sarah, life, like cooking, is about balancing bold risks with heartfelt passion. You can't play it safe, but you can't lose yourself to chaos either. And you, Ethan, you're my perfect recipe. Ethan smiled, wrapping an arm around her. Ethan, and you're mine, Sarah. We make a pretty good team. His story of Golden Kitchen wasn't just about food or stars. It was about resilience, love, and the power of believing in something greater than yourself. Together, Sarah and Ethan had turned a crumbling dream into a thriving reality, and as they looked toward the future, they knew the best was yet to come. With laughter, love, and a little sous chef on the way, their journey was far from over. It had only just begun.